Dakota Territory, summer of 1885, the wagon moved on without her. Dust rose in the dry morning light, swirling around the wheels like a veil. 8-year-old Maggie Belle Hart stood still in the road, clutching a small bundle wrapped in ticking cloth. Her eyes tracked the shrinking silhouette of the covered wagon, until even its creaks and cracks were swallowed by wind. Behind her, silence settled like ash. No birds, no breeze. Only the soft breath of a child trying not to cry. Her stepmother, Eliza, hadn't said a word, just told her to wait while she tied something down. Then the reins snapped, and the wagon rolled away, deliberate and silent as judgment. Maggie looked down at her feet. One boot was scuffed, the heel torn. Her knees trembled, but she didn't sit. In her bundle, a cloth doll with one button eye peeked out. Clara, stitched by her real mama, long ago. The sun climbed, shadows shrank. Still she waited, she counted to 100. Twice, then again. A buzzard circled overhead. That's when she heard the sound. Hooves, one horse. Steady gait. She turned slow. A man approached from the ridge above. Broad shoulders, dust-colored coat. Gray in his beard. He didn't rush, didn't call out. When he stopped 10 paces from her, his eyes met hers, steady, unblinking. "You lost?" he asked, his voice dry as mesquite bark. She shook her head. "You left behind." This time, she didn't answer. The man dismounted, slow and careful, like approaching a wild colt. "I'm Gideon Reid." "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Maggie." He crouched beside her, looking into her face. "That's a strong name. And what about her?" He nodded toward the bundle in her arms. "She's Clara," Maggie whispered. "That a good name?" he said. "How long you been waiting, Maggie?" She blinked. "I don't know." He nodded, then stood. "Come on. Let's get you warm food and something to drink." She hesitated. Gideon didn't press. He just stood there, waiting, like he had all the time in the world. And then she took his hand. Gideon lifted her into the saddle, swung up behind her, and together they rode down the long road, where the dust had begun to settle. The sun slid behind a ridge, casting long shadows across the prairie. They moved at a slow pace, Gideon on his horse, Maggie in the saddle ahead of him, Clara the doll tucked safely in her arms. She hadn't said much since they left the trail, but she hadn't tried to run either. The man's voice was calm when he spoke, never loud, never fast. He pointed out distant landmarks, told the names of creeks and hills like they were neighbors he trusted. "That rise there," he said. "We call it Widow's Bluff. Storms catch their breath before crossing it." Maggie listened, not speaking, but her shoulders had loosened, just a little. As dusk fell, they reached a low creek where the water ran cold and clean over smooth stones. Gideon swung off the horse and lifted Maggie down, careful not to spook her. He made a small fire, its light flickering against her face. From his saddlebag, he pulled out a tin of beans and a square of cornbread wrapped in cloth. She watched him pour water into a tin cup and heat it by the flame. When he handed her the food, her hands shook. "Take your time," he said. "You're safe now." She took a bite, then another. Ate until the tin was clean. "Why'd she leave me?" she asked, voice barely there. He looked into the fire. Some folks break quiet. Others break loud. But most times it's not about the child. Maggie stared into the flames. Gideon didn't fill the silence. When the stars came out, he laid a blanket near the fire and let her curl up beside it. She held Clara to her chest and whispered to the doll like it could answer. Gideon sat by the fire with his hat in his lap, eyes on the darkness beyond. And though she never said so, Maggie slept that night with her hand resting close to his. They arrived just past mid-morning. Willow Creek Ranch stretched out like a painting, its fence lines curling around golden fields and leaning barns, all tucked beneath the sweep of cottonwood trees. The house sat on a rise, modest, strong-boned, with smoke rising from the chimney and the front door left open like it was always expecting someone. Gideon lifted Maggie from the saddle. She blinked up at the house, squinting in the sunlight. Her boots crunched the dry earth. She didn't move until Gideon did. A woman stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron. "Gideon Reid, what's this?" she asked, eyes fixed on the child clinging to the rag doll. "This," he said, "is Maggie Belle." The woman's voice softened. "Well, hello there, Maggie. I'm Isabella." Maggie clutched Clara tighter but didn't back away. Isabella nodded once, then turned on her heel. "Well, come on then. I expect she's hungry." The kitchen smelled like stew and bread. Maggie's eyes widened at the table. Real plates, real chairs, sunlight cutting across the floorboards. Isabella handed her a bowl and a spoon. No one asked her questions while she ate. Gideon leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her like a man remembering something he didn't say out loud. After lunch, Isabella led her to the washroom. "You can leave your things here. There's a bed upstairs, soft and warm. Don't worry about cleaning the doll. She's earned her dirt." Maggie glanced at the towel and soap. Isabella didn't press, just smiled and left her be. That night, Maggie lay beneath a quilt stitched with stars. She whispered to Clara beneath the covers. No one shouted. No one slammed a door. Just the sound of wind in the eaves, and the creak of a house learning a new rhythm. She didn't know it yet, but something had shifted. This place, this house on the rise, had made room for her, and it would never be empty again. The days began early. The land expected work, and the people who lived on it knew not to argue. Maggie rose with the sun, boots clumsy on the stairs, eyes still half closed. Her hair tangled, her dress wrinkled, but her hands remembered what Gideon taught: how to tie a saddle strap, how to brush down a horse without making it flinch. "Firm but gentle," he'd said, laying his hand on hers. "Like the way the wind moves through wheat. Never too much." She read at night with Isabella beside the oil lamp, her lips sounding out the shapes of words. "Pioneer," she'd whisper. "Prairie. Belong." Some days she helped bake bread, flour dusting her nose. Cheeks streaked with laughter she didn't know she had. She cried too. Once over a broken toy. Once when she couldn't write the letter G the right way. And once when she found a blue ribbon in a drawer and didn't know why it made her chest hurt. Isabella never asked what was wrong. She just sat beside her, placed a hand on her back, and let the silence hold steady. One afternoon, while watching Gideon mend a fence, Maggie stood beside him and said, "You don't have to keep me." He didn't look up from the post. "I know." She kicked at the dirt, eyes fixed on her shoes. "But I'd like to stay." He met her eyes then. "Then you will." That night, while clearing dishes, she set down her fork, turned to him in the firelight, and said the word like it had been burning in her mouth for days. "Papa." Gideon didn't flinch. He just nodded, once, and said, "All right then." And from that moment, neither of them was alone. The day started like any other. Sky the color of polished bone, wind sharp as a file. Chickens scratched in the yard. Horses stomped in the paddock. Maggie sat on the porch, carefully braiding her own hair, while Isabella shelled peas by the window. Then came the sound. Wagon wheels. 2 horses. One rider in a wide black hat, another with a bonnet drawn tight. Gideon stepped out, hand resting on the post, not on the gun hanging just inside the door. His face hardened, not with fear, but with recognition. Cyrus Graves climbed down first. Dust clung to his coat like it had nowhere else to go. Eliza stepped out behind him, her boots touching the earth like it offended her. "Maggie Belle Hart," Cyrus called. "We've come to take the girl." Maggie froze. She hadn't heard her full name spoken like that in months. Not with that cold bite on the end of it. Gideon stayed calm. "She lives here now." Cyrus pulled a paper from his coat. Legal claim, step parental guardianship. Signed by Judge Silas Trent himself. Isabella came out drying her hands on a cloth. Maggie moved closer to her. "She ain't property," Isabella said. "You don't claim children like cattle." Eliza's voice was sharper. "She belongs with her family." "She's got one," Gideon replied. But Cyrus wasn't just greedy. That much was clear in the way he looked at Maggie. Not with malice, but with a twisted sense of duty. Like he believed dragging her back was the righteous thing to do. "I won't let her grow up in a house without law, without her name rightfully bound," he said. "I'm not the villain here." Gideon stepped forward. "You might think you're doing right, but that girl's voice matters now." All eyes turned to Maggie. She stepped forward. Just one step, just enough. "I'm not going with you," she said. Eliza opened her mouth, but Gideon raised a hand. "No more words," he said. "We'll settle this proper, with a judge who hasn't sold his name for ink and coin." Cyrus hesitated, then climbed back onto the wagon bench. "This ain't finished." "No," Gideon agreed, eyes cold. "It's just begun." They rode off, and the ranch held still like it was listening. Maggie didn't speak for the rest of the day. But that night, she tucked Clara beside her and whispered, "They're not taking me." And the stars outside seemed to nod in quiet agreement. The courthouse was no more than a square room with a flagstone floor and a brass scale that hadn't seen balance in years. But on that day, it held more weight than any gallows. Gideon stood tall, his hat in his hand, shirt pressed stiff beneath his coat. Isabella sat with Maggie between them. Clara tucked in the crook of the girl's arm like a quiet reminder of the road she'd walked to get here. Judge Alton Hayes presided. Fair man. Silver hair. Sharp eyes. Known to rule by heart as much as law. Cyrus and Eliza sat across the aisle, parchment in hand, lawyer whispering in their ears. Guardianship, their side said. Signed. Sealed. But Gideon's voice cut through like a clean nail through pine. That girl was left. No food. No care. No shelter. She wasn't abandoned by mistake. She was discarded. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Hayes looked to Maggie. You wish to stay with the Raids? Maggie nodded. Yes, sir. Why? She held Clara tighter. Because they don't ask me to be anything but myself. And they don't leave. There wasn't a soul in that room who didn't feel it. Hayes folded the paper, set it aside. My ruling is simple, he said. She stays. Cyrus made a sound, half sigh, half growl. But Eliza was already rising, her mouth set in stone. As they turned to go, Hayes added, and in regard to the question of blood, love is the only claim I recognize today. The gavel fell once. Outside, sun poured like mercy onto the dust. Gideon turned to Isabella. Let's make it official. She raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? He took her hands. I want to marry you. Today here. Isabella stared, then smiled. You sure this ain't heat stroke? He grinned, first time in days. Nope. Just a man with no more reason to wait. They wed beneath the courthouse eaves with the judge and the sheriff as witnesses. Maggie stood close beside Isabella, her small fingers clutching the hem of her dress, whispering every vow into memory. When the words were done and the papers signed, Gideon kissed Isabella with a gentleness that said family was a choice, not an accident. And from that moment on, they belonged to each other. By law, by love. By the grace of a little girl who stood her ground. 6 years passed, and the ranch wore the seasons like an old coat. Patched in places, weathered, but reliable. Maggie Belle Hart was 14 now. She rode like she was born to it. Boots firm in the stirrups, braid trailing behind her like a ribbon of fire. She read every book in Gideon's study, aloud sometimes for Emma and little Jack, who came 2 years after the vows. She helped Isabella bake, now measuring by instinct instead of guesswork. And she taught the neighbor's boy to write his name, without once making him feel slow. The barn was her chapel, the pasture her school. One spring, when a colt broke free and bolted toward the ravine, she lassoed it clean from the rise. No panic. Just calm hands and a quiet whisper to bring it home. She'd grown taller than Isabella, lean as a sapling, steady as the oak behind the house. Her eyes had changed too, still bright, but deeper now. Like they remembered everything and forgave most of it. Clara still sat on her shelf, one eye missing, stuffing thin, but Maggie never thought to throw her out. One morning, while mending a torn saddle strap, Maggie looked up and said, "Papa, what would you think about starting a school? Just for the ranch kids. And others. Ones like me." Gideon set down his coffee. "I think you already did," he said. She smiled and wiped her hands on her apron. "Not yet. But I'm going to." Later that day, she walked the fence line with Emma skipping beside her and Jack balanced on her hip. The wind picked up, carrying dust and birdsong and the scent of wildflowers. Isabella watched from the porch. "She's not a child anymore," she said. Gideon nodded. "No, but she'll always be ours." And the land, which had once only echoed with hoofbeats and wind, now hummed with the sounds of a family that had built something stronger than blood. The sun dipped low, casting the fields in amber light as harvest whispered through the grass. Maggie Belle Hart stood at the edge of the barn, hands resting on the fence rail, gaze fixed beyond the ridgeline. She'd spent the morning writing, the afternoon helping Jack with his letters, and the last hour in quiet thought. Behind her, the ranch moved like a living thing. Emma's laughter from the porch, Isabella humming while folding laundry, the steady creak of the windmill turning with the breeze. Gideon stepped up beside her, sipping his coffee. "You're quiet," he said. "Just thinking," she replied. "About what?" She looked out over the land, then back at him. "About what to build next." He followed her gaze, the wind brushing against his coat. "Something new?" She nodded. "A place for others, kids like me." He didn't speak at first, just breathed in the late summer air and nodded. "You've got the heart for it. I've got the home for it," she said, "and the people." Later that evening, as the family gathered on the porch, Maggie stood up. "I want to build something here," she said aloud. "A home, not just for us, but for others, for the ones still out there." Isabella, with Jack in her lap and Emma leaning against her, looked at Gideon. He gave a small nod. "Then we best get to planning," Isabella said. That night, in the quiet glow of lamplight, Maggie wrote her thoughts down on paper. Not for a school essay or a letter, but for something she could return to. "My name is Maggie Belle Hart. I was once left behind, but I was found and loved, and now I'll spend my life giving that gift to others. Because the world may break us, but love, real love, puts us back together." She signed her name. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, like it had something important to say. And Maggie was ready to listen.